The hours before dawn hold a particular stillness, that brief span when darkness has begun loosening its hold, but daylight has yet to take command. Within one of England's imperial towns, the roads remain largely undisturbed, bearing only the traces of the previous day's traffic while waiting for the next wave of activity to begin. In modest quarters situated close to the town's governing district, a collector of taxes rises at an hour dictated by long-standing habit rather than any pressing demand. This timing serves no theatrical purpose, existing instead as part of an established routine. The tasks awaiting completion require groundwork laid carefully and without haste. Garments are chosen with deliberate thought, selected not to impress but to endure and to convey official function without ostentation. These same pieces have seen countless wearings and will see countless more. Footwear receives inspection, fastenings are secured, and outer coverings are made appropriate to the current weather. The movements involved have become nearly reflexive, molded through years spent performing this same service. The chamber holding these preparations carries the marks of administrative labor. Organization prevails, though not to the point of austerity. A writing surface of limited size supports implements of record-keeping, positioned with intention and examined each new day. The thickness of ink receives consideration. Writing instruments undergo scrutiny for signs of deterioration. Sheets of paper are tallied and made even. These undertakings proceed without rush. They set the tenor of what follows. The precision demanded later finds its foundation in the tranquility of these early moments. Close at hand, a leather case waits against the wall surface. Before long, it will contain record books, official declarations, and documentation of payment. Every object within has an assigned position, learned through extended practice. Nothing extraneous finds its way inside. The burden carried must be measured. Distribution of weight holds importance. The collector grasps that managing the day's physical load becomes necessary if the responsibilities of administration are to be handled effectively. Beyond the walls, the town stirs toward wakefulness. Faint indications mark morning's advance. Somewhere down the lane, a threshold parts. Brief passage of footfalls reaches the ear before fading into silence. The atmosphere holds traces of moisture against stone and the remnants of yesterday's fires. Through an elevated opening, the collector's gaze settles on the street below without particular intention. This brief observation follows pattern. It grants the mind opportunity to orient itself toward the work ahead. No expectation of difficulty or achievement enters thought. The duties are familiar and unchanging. They exist independent of disposition. The structures of empire rest not upon occasional moments of insight, but upon the reliable completion of obligations repeated through innumerable similar dawns. The morning meal takes simple form and serves practical ends. Sustenance is consumed to maintain capacity rather than to ceremonialize the hour. The collector eats without company, mentally reviewing what the day holds without reference to written schedules. The sequence stands already known. Particular residences receive visits on designated days. Certain tradespeople are approached only during specified intervals. These arrangements have been shaped through established practice, through agreement, and through years of accumulated knowledge. Departing from these patterns generates friction that serves no purpose. The collector's function involves not surprising those visited, but arriving when anticipated. Regularity diminishes opposition. Predictability preserves orderliness. Prior to stepping out, the day's documentation receives another examination. Official notices undergo careful folding. Wax impressions are verified. Names pass quietly through the collector's awareness, understood not as persons but as positions within a larger framework. Every name connects to a duty established through statute, determined by precedent, and noted during earlier encounters. The collector refrains from passing judgment on these requirements. Such judgment resides within the system itself, not with those tasked with its enforcement. This separation is absorbed early in one's service and reinforced continually. It permits the work to advance unburdened by sentiment. When the threshold opens onto the street, the town reveals itself in stages. Structures stand in close proximity, their outlines recognizable. The collector maintains knowledge of which entrances belong to merchants, which to artisans, which to households that will demand patience over swiftness. The path followed each morning has been honed through accumulated experience. Particular routes prove quieter during these hours. Others already show signs of movement. The chosen way balances effectiveness with conspicuousness. Visibility carries significance. The manifestation of governing power brings reassurance to some and unease to others, yet it must never seem abrupt or concealed. Progress through the streets proceeds without hurry. Time exists before the first official encounter. The collector employs this span to note prevailing conditions. Atmospheric circumstances influence commerce. Mire impedes wagons. Chill affects disposition. These elements do not alter legal obligations, yet they shape how events will progress. Awareness of them facilitates smoother transactions afterward. The labor involved transcends mere mechanism. It demands sustained observation. Even so, that observation remains measured and subdued. When the administrative district comes into range of vision, the edifices connected to imperial governance distinguish themselves not solely through scale, but through upkeep. Entryways are maintained in good repair, masonry receives regular attention, openings are arranged with geometric precision. These buildings communicate continuity through their recognizable form. They are encountered daily by scribes, couriers, and functionaries who pass in and out following established timing. The collector approaches not as someone unfamiliar, but as one element within this ongoing pattern. Within the office space, the environment remains subdued. Others have already taken their positions, each occupied with individual preparation. Brief acknowledgements pass between them, stripped of excess. Speech is confined to what proves necessary. Notices may require interpretation. Directions may need confirmation. There exists no discussion of underlying intent. Intent is understood implicitly. The empire operates through common comprehension rather than constant restatement. Record volumes are issued and cross-referenced against earlier notations. Amendments are recorded without fanfare. Irregularities are flagged for subsequent consideration. No effort is made toward immediate resolution of every matter. The day ahead will yield additional information. The morning establishes the framework within which that information will be gathered. Once the case is reorganized and secured, the collector pauses once more, momentarily before returning to the street. This instant signals the shift from groundwork to execution. The sun has completed its rise, the town stands awake, commercial establishments lift their coverings, laborers proceed with clear purpose. The collector merges into this movement without standing apart. The function involves not commanding the thoroughfare, but moving through it as one component among numerous others. The work approaching will consist of entrances gained and departed, language exchanged with composure, figures stated and entered into record. It will demand forbearance, precision, and control. All of this finds its basis in the unhurried groundwork of this early interval. The day has commenced not through declaration, but through alignment. The mechanisms of empire depend upon mornings such as these, duplicated across settlements and across seasons, executed by persons whose identities seldom appear in records beyond the documents they complete. The collector advances into the established course of obligation, the sound of steps merging with the broader cadence of the town as morning transitions into its continuing rhythm. The morning presses forward into its active phase, as the collector departs the administrative office and re-enters the street, now bearing the materials that will define the remainder of the day. The case settles at its accustomed weight, positioned so it pulls evenly rather than to either side. Within rest volumes bound in aged hide, folded declarations carrying authorized marks, loose sheets readied for documenting payments, and writing implements wrapped to prevent harm. These items function not as representations, but as tools. Their state matters because precision depends upon orderliness. The collector has absorbed the lesson that disarray invites mistakes, and mistakes invite contestation. The empire accommodates neither with ease. The day's initial objective leads not to residence or shop, but to a measured return to the chamber of records beside the office, where updates from the preceding night undergo review. Though the primary labor of collection unfolds in the town's lanes and structures, it originates and concludes with documentation. Inside the records chamber, clerks navigate deliberately among surfaces and shelving, retrieving volumes that chronicle earlier determinations, dispensations, outstanding balances, and modifications. The atmosphere carries subtle traces of writing fluid and parchment. Illumination enters through raised openings, distributed and constant. Conversation remains sparse. Each individual present recognizes the necessity of uniformity. The collector finds the volume designated for this day and examines the notations sequentially, verifying names, locations, and sums owed. This proceeds without haste. Every line receives 2 readings. Numbers are compared against recollection and against the entries from the prior quarter. Certain names hold familiarity beyond the written form. They correspond to tradespeople whose enterprises remain steady, craftspeople whose remittances arrive regularly, and households whose situations undergo little alteration. Others demand greater focus. A marginal notation might signal postponed payment, incomplete settlement, or accommodation reached under particular terms. These annotations appear in controlled script, employing phrasing that resists ambiguity. The collector depends upon these notations to sustain continuity. Today's encounter must honor yesterday's understanding. Departing from documented terms erodes confidence, and confidence, once compromised, demands considerable labor to rebuild. Directives from higher administrative levels are consulted next. These arrive through routine distribution. They may specify collection timetables, declare temporary modifications, or reinforce established procedures. The collector reads them with care but without visible response. Instructions are absorbed and implemented. They are not subjected to debate. When clarification proves necessary, it is sought quietly from a senior clerk. The manner remains even. Administrative function achieves its best results when sentiment is excluded. Following the review of records, the collector constructs the planned progression for the morning. This exists not in written form, but as mental architecture. Certain collections occur early because those involved favor it. Others receive deliberate postponement, permitting time for enterprises to fully open or for households to complete morning obligations. Timing carries weight. Appearing prematurely generates disruption. Arriving belatedly implies urgency. The equilibrium is acquired across years. Upon leaving the records chamber, the collector steps once more into the street. The town has reached full activity. Wagons proceed along primary routes. Proprietors position goods beyond their thresholds. Speech carries from elevated openings. The collector maintains steady motion, neither rushed nor lingering. The presence is intended to register as visible yet unremarkable. Authority that draws focus to itself provokes opposition. Authority that integrates into routine gains more ready acceptance. As the collector nears the first zone of collection, attention undergoes subtle refinement. Observation grows more concentrated. An open merchant's door signals preparedness. A craftsman's workspace producing sound indicates labor underway. These indicators inform how the engagement will unfold. The collector halts briefly before the first entrance, not to summon determination, but to ensure composure. Each engagement must begin without presumption. The day's initial exchange typically follows a straightforward course. The collector announces function with measured tone, without inflection. Documentation is offered. The sum required is articulated plainly. The merchant responds with recognition, producing payment that has likely been readied beforehand. Currency is tallied deliberately within clear sight. Acknowledgement of receipt is inscribed carefully, fluid allowed to set before the sheet is folded. The merchant confirms receipt. Further words prove unnecessary. The exchange concludes as it commenced, without elaboration. Following each visit, the collector records the completed transaction in the volume. Entries are made without delay. Memory is not relied upon when documentation is accessible. Each line receives the same consideration as those before. No differentiation exists between substantial amounts and modest ones. Exactness applies without variation. The case increases marginally in weight with coin, yet the transformation is incremental and anticipated. Not every visit proceeds without complication. Some necessitate brief exchange. A merchant may invoke an earlier arrangement. The collector refers to the volume, verifying particulars. When adjustment is authorized, it is executed according to documented provisions. When it is not, the explanation is delivered without expansion. The collector does not engage in argument. The function involves presenting the system faithfully, not advocating for it. Most disagreements resolve when clarity supplants confusion. As the morning continues its advance, the collector navigates different portions of the town. Each district possesses its own tempo. Commercial thoroughfares prove efficient and purposeful. Residential passages require additional patience. The collector modifies bearing and speech subtly, without deliberate thought. Years of repetition have cultivated this adaptability. The labor is not physically taxing, yet it demands continuous attention. Throughout the morning, the collector maintains consciousness of time's passage. The framework permits brief intervals between grouped visits. These intervals serve not as respite but as occasions to refresh records and verify the subsequent sequence. The day must progress evenly. Falling into arrears creates strain afterward. Advancing too rapidly produces errors. Equilibrium proves essential. By the morning's middle phase, a pattern has taken shape. Multiple collections stand completed. Others remain forthcoming. The collector reviews the volume again while positioned in a sheltered portion of a square, modifying the route as circumstances require. A household not yet prepared will be approached during a later hour. A merchant whose absence has been noted will receive attention in the afternoon. These modifications form part of the labor. Adaptability functions within framework. The empire's manifestation in the town does not take the form of banners or official statements during these hours. It exists in the measured progression of the collector from threshold to threshold, in the meticulous recording of amounts, in the undramatic acceptance of obligation. The morning persists in this manner, shaped through repetition and restraint, as the collector proceeds further into the day's established routine. The streets fill more completely as the morning finds its working tempo, and the collector adjusts movement in response. This portion of the day draws its character less from groundwork and more from watchfulness. The town discloses itself through motion rather than through quiet. Wagons bearing merchandise advance slowly along customary paths. Proprietors shift in and out of doorways, positioning items with rehearsed efficiency. Apprentices transport implements and supplies between work sites. The collector walks amid these activities without disrupting their flow, traversing spaces where effort is already in progress. The work of collection now develops within this wider pattern of town existence, not separate from it. Passage through the streets serves more than transport between collections. It constitutes a necessary dimension of the task. The collector monitors how enterprises function, observing indicators of stability or stress. A shop opening later than customary may reflect difficulty. A merchant widening the area of display may suggest expanding trade. These observations do not enter formal record, yet they shape how future engagements will develop. The collector does not engage in open conjecture. Instead, awareness is retained quietly, influencing tone and anticipation. The function requires neither distrust nor compassion, only sustained attentiveness. Particular streets demand slower transit. Constricted lanes compel movement in single file, and the collector steps to the side when wagons or assemblies pass. This consideration is intentional. Sustaining order relies upon cooperation, not assertion. The presence of governing power that acknowledges daily labor strengthens acceptance. People register these minor conducts even when they offer no comment. Across time, they contribute to standing. The collector's standing is not constructed upon force, but upon reliability and measured conduct. As the route progresses, the collector encounters persons whose obligations are recognized but not yet due. A craftsman offers a brief nod while passing. A household head acknowledges with minimal greeting. These moments do not constitute collections, yet they hold significance. They strengthen familiarity. When the occasion arrives to approach those thresholds, the presence will not register as sudden. The system functions most effectively when it registers as continuous rather than invasive. The middle portion of morning brings transformation in ambient sound. The consistent tempo of labor is joined by voices elevated in commerce, discussion, and direction. Markets grow more animated. The collector passes along the periphery of a square where buyers and sellers congregate, mindful not to obstruct flow. This zone will receive attention later, once transactions diminish and focus can be directed. Timing holds greater importance here than elsewhere. Disrupting trade generates irritation. Permitting it to proceed first ensures more fluid exchange afterward. The collector pauses momentarily at the square's margin, not for rest, but to refer to the volume again. Entries undergo review. Completed collections receive clear notation. Those remaining are organized by proximity. This quiet examination prevents needless retracing. The case is repositioned slightly as currency shifts within. Weight remains sustainable. Nothing is withdrawn yet. Security depends upon discretion. The collector does not tally accumulated coin where it can be observed. Moving forward, the collector enters a residential zone where morning patterns differ from those of commerce. Here, the rhythm is less hurried. Thresholds part less often. The sounds of domestic occupation replace those of trade. Children move among dwellings. Water is transported, food is readied. The collector's footfalls grow softer, less emphatic. Knocking is calibrated. The voice employed to announce presence is even and without inflection. In these contexts, manner carries more influence than language. Some households answer readily. Payment is furnished with limited discussion. Others require clarification. The collector attends without interrupting, then addresses the matter by referencing documented provisions. The volume is accessed and displayed when appropriate. This openness diminishes friction. Disagreement is managed through citation, not through declaration. If payment cannot be rendered completely, arrangements already in record are honored. If no such arrangement has been established, the circumstance is noted for later consideration. The collector does not resolve all matters directly. The system permits advancement when required. Between these encounters, the collector continues monitoring the town's cadence. Patterns become evident. Particular streets reach peak activity at specific intervals. Particular households favor engagement at foreseeable times. This knowledge accumulates gradually. It cannot be transmitted rapidly. It is acquired through repetition across years. The collector's effectiveness depends less upon rapidity and more upon this knowledge. As the morning extends, the town achieves a consistent level of occupation. Labor proceeds steadily. The collector's function becomes one motion among numerous others. No sense of pressure exists, yet neither does any cessation. Each completed collection permits the day to advance according to design. Each postponed one is registered without displeasure. The framework is constructed to accommodate variation. By the time the sun achieves its elevated position, the collector has traversed multiple districts, finalized multiple collections, and assembled sufficient information to shape what remains. The morning's labor has established forward motion. Records are current, the route stands clear. The town's condition is comprehended adequately to proceed without modification for the present. The collector reduces pace slightly near a recognized intersection, marking the conclusion of this phase of movement and observation. Beyond lies the subsequent sequence of engagements, more concentrated and more purposeful. The morning has accomplished its work without fanfare, bringing the collector into alignment with the town's rhythm. From this point, the day will continue not as disconnected tasks, but as sustained flow of duty carried forward without pause. The subsequent phase brings the collector into more concentrated and extended exchanges, as the routine movement of morning yields to intentional pauses and formalized interactions. This portion of the work appears quieter externally, yet carries greater weight in outcome. The earlier hours established familiarity and tempo. Now that tempo supports the actual work of collection. The collector approaches each threshold with identical measured bearing, neither anticipatory nor reluctant. The hand that strikes does so with uniform force, sufficient to register clearly yet not so much as to convey impatience. Each knock is succeeded by an interval that permits the household or enterprise to respond at its own rhythm. The first of these collections concerns a modest merchant whose obligations are limited but consistent. Within the shop, merchandise is positioned with care, demonstrating attention to arrangement that echoes the collector's own practices. The exchange commences with recognition rather than directive. The collector articulates the visit's purpose with composure. The required amount is stated without emphasis. The merchant attends, acknowledges, and obtains payment from a designated location. Currency is counted deliberately on a level surface. The collector does not hasten this moment. Counting serves both practical and symbolic function. It confirms that the exchange is exact and comprehensive. Once the amount receives verification, acknowledgement of receipt is inscribed carefully. Fluid is permitted to settle. The sheet is folded cleanly and transferred. The volume is updated without delay. The engagement concludes without further conversation. Both parties resume their respective labors. Not all encounters follow such direct paths. At the subsequent location, a craftsman describes delayed delivery, affecting income. The collector listens without interruption, eyes moving briefly across the volume to verify earlier notations. The record shows a previous modification under comparable circumstances. The collector references this with composure, reviewing the terms already established. The craftsman concurs, relieved that the arrangement is recalled accurately. Incomplete payment is documented. The outstanding portion is noted according to established protocol. No assurances are offered beyond what appears in writing. This precision prevents confusion subsequently. As the collector proceeds from one site to the next, the pattern recurs with modification. Some engagements demand little beyond presence and documentation. Others involve clarification, verification, or measured discussion within authorized parameters. The collector's manner remains constant. No visible response occurs to compliance or challenge. Emotional detachment is essential. It protects both participants from intensification and maintains focus on procedure rather than situation. Between encounters, the collector withdraws into less populated spaces to refresh records. Each entry undergoes 2 examinations before the page turns. The volume fills progressively, lines accumulating with consistent script. The case grows heavier, yet its contents remain organized. Currency is distributed by denomination and position, preventing disorder later. This discipline eliminates the need for recounting and provides assurance that nothing has been misplaced. Midway through this sequence, the collector faces a situation requiring pause. A household head is not present, and payment cannot be completed. The collector notes the time and circumstances of the visit. A return is scheduled mentally for later in the day. No communication is left beyond the official declaration already delivered previously. The system accommodates absence. It doesn't presume evasion without evidence. This restraint preserves fairness and prevents needless friction. As morning approaches midday, the frequency of visits diminishes slightly, not because the work stands finished, but because the town itself transforms. Markets begin to disperse. Workshops pause momentarily. Meals are consumed. The collector adapts accordingly, refraining from disruption of these routines. This timing has been absorbed across years. Demanding collection during meals creates antagonism that serves no administrative function. The empire's effectiveness depends upon sustained compliance, not immediate assertion. The collector employs this interval to assess progress. Standing near a quiet surface or beneath the shade of a structure, the volume is accessed again. Completed collections are tallied mentally. Those outstanding are arranged by proximity and precedence. No anxiety exists about finishing prematurely or belatedly. The day is constructed to accommodate the necessary work without compression. Haste would invite mistakes. Postponement would invite examination. Equilibrium is sustained through adherence to routine. Throughout these exchanges, the collector remains conscious of being watched. Town residents register patterns even when they do not articulate them. A collector who maintains composure, consistency, and exactness becomes incorporated into the town's anticipated order. This anticipation diminishes resistance across time. People ready themselves for visits, payments are designated, conversations remain concise. The system perpetuates itself through predictability. As the final collection of the morning's plan is completed, the collector closes the volume carefully and secures it within the case. The immediate phase of collection stands complete for now. The town transitions toward midday stillness. The collector steps back into motion, proceeding toward a quieter zone, where the next phase of the day will develop more gradually, shaped by reflection as much as by action. The middle of the day arrives without fanfare, indicated not by isolated sound or marker, but by gradual diminishment of activity across the town. The momentum that propelled the morning forward begins to relent. Shops draw their coverings partway closed. Workshops grow quiet as implements are laid aside. Movement persists, yet it is less purposeful. The collector perceives this transformation immediately, not as alteration in timetable, but as shift in environment. This segment of the day is structured to absorb that deceleration, permitting the work to persist without imposing it against the town's natural tempo. The collector proceeds toward a customary location selected for this interval, neither conspicuous nor concealed. It may be a small courtyard adjacent to administrative structures, or a resting place positioned against a stone surface where pedestrian traffic passes without halting. The location holds less significance than its familiarity. It sees regular use at this identical hour and therefore necessitates no justification. The collector sits or remains standing quietly, adjusting the case so its contents stay protected, and accesses the volume again, not to gather or document new information, but to examine what has already been accomplished. This examination follows method. Each notation from the morning receives rereading. Amounts are verified against recollection and against the weight now held. Annotations are confirmed for precision. Any ambiguity is marked inconspicuously for later consideration. This process proceeds without urgency. Midday offers space for this thorough confirmation. Errors identified here do not become complications later. The collector comprehends that this pause constitutes not departure from duty, but central element of it. The empire's mechanisms depend upon verification as much as execution. As this examination continues, the collector reflects briefly on the structure of the work itself, not abstractly but concretely. The sequence of encounters, the manner of exchanges, and the responses obtained all contribute to a larger pattern that repeats across days and years. The collector does not contemplate individual circumstances profoundly. That degree of assessment resides elsewhere. Instead, attention settles on uniformity. Were protocols observed? Were records transparent? Was the presence measured? These questions shape the reflection, ensuring alignment with the function. Around this time, nourishment is taken if required. It is modest and discreet, selected for practicality rather than satisfaction. Eating does not disrupt the work. It accompanies it without disturbance. The collector remains watchful of surroundings even during this brief sustenance. Conversations in proximity pass without involvement. The collector exists neither removed nor engaged. This position between participation and separation defines the function. It permits observation without intervention. The midday interval also permits the town to adjust to the collector's presence. Those not yet visited register the pause and anticipate the afternoon's resumption. Those already visited return to their activities. The system expands and contracts. This breathing is purposeful. Uninterrupted pressure generates resistance. Granting space reinforces acceptance. The collector's timetable reflects this comprehension, formed through extended experience rather than directive. As the sun passes beyond its apex, activity begins returning incrementally. Shops reopen completely, workshops resume sound. The collector closes the volume, secures it, and rises without haste. No sensation exists of recommencing after interruption. The work has persisted throughout, merely altering form. The collector adjusts sparing and prepares mentally for the subsequent phase, which will demand renewed engagement and, in certain instances, firmer attention. Before advancing, one final verification is conducted. The case is balanced. Seals remain undisturbed. Writing implements are accessible. The route ahead is reviewed mentally. Certain visits postponed earlier will now prove appropriate. Others will wait until later. Still, the afternoon possesses its own rhythm, distinct from the morning, and the collector aligns with it as deliberately as before. The midday pause concludes as quietly as it commenced. No transition exists beyond movement itself. The collector steps back into the street, merging with the renewed flow of the town. The work persists, carried forward through routine, directed by record, and sustained by the measured pace that permits the day to unfold without strain. The afternoon commences gradually, without distinct demarcation separating it from midday's stillness. The shift is sensed more than observed. The collector perceives it in the manner footsteps regain direction, in the reopening of coverings that had been left partially drawn, in the return of sound to workplaces that had rested briefly. This phase of the day demands renewed attention, yet not renewed urgency. The work resumes according to rhythm already established, informed by the understanding that the afternoon often presents greater complexity than the morning. Circumstances have had time to develop. People are more conscious of what remains unfinished. The collector modifies posture and tempo accordingly, preparing for interactions that may require extended exchanges and clearer articulation. The initial afternoon encounters are directed toward merchants and households that were intentionally reserved for this hour. These are not selected arbitrarily. Experience has demonstrated that particular individuals respond more favorably later in the day, once commerce has stabilized or domestic responsibilities have settled. The collector approaches these locations with identical composed presence as before, yet with heightened attentiveness. The case is positioned carefully when entering an interior space. The volume is accessed deliberately. The act of initiating the interaction proceeds slightly more slowly, permitting the other participant to settle into the exchange without sensing interruption or coercion. In numerous instances, these encounters involve discussion rather than simple transfer. A merchant may pose questions regarding an assessment. The household head may reference altered circumstance. The collector attends completely before replying. Listening forms part of the labor. Interrupting generates confusion and antagonism. Once the explanation reaches completion, the collector responds by referring to the volume and reviewing the relevant notation. The system is presented transparently without elaboration. Where flexibility is permitted, it is applied exactly according to documented allowance. Where it is not, the rationale is articulated plainly. The collector does not express regret, nor does the collector demand. The function involves clarifying, not convincing. Certain encounters extend beyond others. Time is granted for counting, recounting, and verification. Currency is managed slowly, ensuring both participants concur on the amount exchanged. Acknowledgements of receipt are inscribed with care, even when the surroundings are less systematic. Fluid is examined, writing instrument adjusted, script kept uniform. These particulars hold greater importance in the afternoon, when weariness can invite error. The collector is conscious of this and compensates through intentional pacing. Between encounters, the collector navigates slowly through the town, permitting brief moments for readjustment. The streets during afternoon hours possess a different character than during morning. Conversation is more abundant, pressure is diminished. Children move with greater freedom. Merchandise undergoes rearrangement. The collector watches without forming judgment, registering subtle alterations that may influence future labor. A shop that closes earlier than anticipated. A household displaying unusual quietness. These observations do not prompt immediate action. They are retained as background information. As the afternoon continues its progression, the weight of the case becomes more apparent. This is anticipated. The collector adjusts the supporting strap marginally, redistributing the burden to sustain equilibrium. Physical discomfort is managed quietly before it compromises attention. The body must maintain steadiness if the mind is to preserve exactness. These modifications are executed without attracting notice. The collector does not reveal strain. The function depends upon composure. Certain engagements necessitate returning to earlier annotations. An incomplete payment documented during morning may now reach completion. The collector verifies the earlier notation, ensuring continuity. This follow-through strengthens confidence. Individuals observe that records are preserved accurately across intervals. Nothing escapes notice. Nothing is left to improvisation. The system retains memory, and the collector embodies that retention. Occasionally, an encounter does not yield collection. The explanation is documented carefully. Absence, incapacity, or postponement are noted without interpretation. The collector does not engage in open speculation. These situations will be managed through appropriate channels when necessary. The afternoon permits this forbearance. No requirement exists to resolve everything within the day. The empire's chronology extends beyond individual timetables. As illumination begins shifting subtly, the collector grows more conscious of time's movement. The afternoon will not persist indefinitely. Remaining encounters are prioritized quietly. The route undergoes slight adjustment to eliminate needless movement. Effectiveness returns gently, without urgency. Each remaining engagement is approached with identical care as the first, despite the accumulation of hours. Throughout this phase, the collector sustains emotional detachment. Weariness does not modify manner. Irritation, when it surfaces, is contained internally. The function demands steadiness above all else. The afternoon challenges this steadiness more than the morning. The collector addresses that challenge through routine and control. By the time the sun commences its gradual lowering, the majority of afternoon encounters have reached completion. The volume reflects a full day's labor, though the day itself has not yet concluded. The collector pauses briefly at the margin of a recognized street, examining what remains. The most demanding physical and social labor of the day has passed. What lies ahead will require concentration of a different nature, focused inward rather than outward. The afternoon settles toward completion without declaration. The collector prepares to transition from movement and exchange back toward consolidation and documentation, carrying forward the results of the day's engagements into the quieter work that follows. The later afternoon brings subtle intensification of focus as the work transforms from routine exchange toward matters that demand firmer attention and careful management. By this point in the day, the collector has already finalized the majority of scheduled encounters. What remains are engagements that could not be resolved earlier, either because circumstances were uncertain or because the individuals involved required additional clarification. These situations are not exceptional. They are anticipated and incorporated within the day's structure. The collector approaches them without trepidation, conscious that the afternoon has prepared both the collector and the town for this quieter, more intentional phase. The first of these encounters concerns a merchant whose payments have shown inconsistency across previous periods. The location is recognized, The interior displays indicators of regular commerce, though profit margins appear constrained. The collector enters without declaration beyond the standard greeting. The exchange commences slowly. The merchant describes delays in revenue, citing market circumstances and recent setbacks. The collector attends in full, permitting the explanation to settle before replying. When the moment arrives to speak, the collector references the volume directly, reviewing what has been documented and what remains outstanding. The language employed is exact and restrained. No effort is made to dispute the explanation or to assess intent. The emphasis remains on documented duty. Discussion, when it develops, operates within established parameters. The collector does not formulate new provisions. Instead, previously authorized arrangements are examined and implemented if suitable. If further modification requires approval beyond the collector's jurisdiction, that is articulated clearly. The procedure is outlined without inflection. This transparency diminishes friction. The merchant comprehends that the determination does not depend upon personal assessment. It resides within a framework constructed to manage such circumstances across time. Incomplete payment is received and documented. The balance is noted for examination. Both participants acknowledge the result without further exchange. Other encounters follow comparable patterns. A household head seeks clarification on a declaration received earlier. The collector retrieves the document, reads it aloud with composure, and explains its origin and function. Questions are addressed directly, employing the language of documentation rather than interpretation. When confusion emerges, it is resolved through reference to written provisions. This dependence upon documentation stabilizes the engagement. The collector does not depend upon memory alone. The record articulates, and the collector ensures it is conveyed accurately. Throughout this phase, the collector remains conscious of manner. Voices are maintained at low volume. Movements are calibrated. Even when disagreement is present, it is managed through procedure rather than display. The collector has absorbed that firmness does not demand force. It demands consistency. Each engagement is guided back to documentation, timetable, and precedent. These elements provide a common framework that permits resolution without intensification. The town itself responds to this presence differently during late afternoon. Movement decelerates again, fewer people occupy the streets. Those encountered are often returning homeward or closing their places of enterprise. The collector's visibility during this time reinforces the perception that the day's work is concluding appropriately. Nothing has been left unresolved without recognition. The system has been implemented evenly. Between these encounters, the collector pauses occasionally to refresh the volume in sheltered corners or against surfaces warmed by the sun's lingering presence. Entries are made with attention. Marginal annotations are added where required. The collector exercises particular care to ensure that any unresolved situations are marked clearly, preventing confusion in future days. This attention to particulars ensures continuity beyond the present moment. As the afternoon deepens, the remaining engagements become fewer, yet no less significant. Each one represents a thread that must be woven carefully into the broader fabric of administration. The collector approaches these final encounters with identical seriousness as the first, despite the day's duration. Weariness is acknowledged internally and managed through intentional pacing. Eventually, the list of remaining encounters narrows to completion. The collector closes the volume gently and secures it within the case. The most externally facing work of the day is complete. What remains is the inward labor of consolidation, tallying, and preparation for examination. The collector begins the return toward the administrative district, proceeding through streets that are now quieter, bearing the accumulated weight of the day's obligations in both currency and documentation. The late afternoon has fulfilled its function. It has resolved what could be resolved and documented what could not. The system remains whole. The town settles toward evening with the understanding that order has been sustained without disruption. The collector walks steadily, bearing unchanged, attention shifting inward as the final phase of the day approaches. The approach of late day brings not relief so much as concentration. As the collector turns back toward the administrative district, the character of the work transforms again. Movement through the town becomes quieter, more inward, and more intentional. The streets are no longer populated. The sound of commerce recedes into ambient noise. Thresholds close for the evening. Illumination shifts across stone surfaces and settles into extended shadows. The collector walks through this environment with steady consciousness, knowing that although most external obligations are complete, the work of the day has not yet concluded. What remains now demands precision of a different nature. Upon reaching the office, the collector enters without formality. The structure is quieter than during morning. Fewer clerks remain, each occupied with individual tasks that demand attention rather than conversation. The atmosphere is one of consolidation. This is the time when the day's activity must be translated into permanent record. The case is positioned carefully on a surface that bears the marks of extended use. Its contents are withdrawn slowly, in identical sequence each day to prevent confusion. Volumes are laid flat, loose sheets are aligned, acknowledgements of receipt are separated, currency remains secured until tallying begins. The process of late-day accounting commences methodically. The collector opens the primary volume and examines each entry in sequence, comparing it against the physical evidence of the day. Currency is tallied carefully, organized by denomination and amount. Each grouping is aligned and retallied. No presumptions are made. Even amounts that seem certain are verified. This discipline is essential. A single irregularity, even a modest one, can compromise confidence in the entire day's work. The collector comprehends that confidence in the system rests upon these quiet moments of verification. As tallying proceeds, the collector notes the status of each transaction. Completed payments are marked clearly. Incomplete payments are cross-referenced with annotations made earlier in the day. Outstanding obligations are listed separately with clear indication of explanation and subsequent step. These lists are not assessments, they are instruments for continuity. Tomorrow, or another day, these matters will be addressed by the same process that governs all others. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is presumed resolved without documentation. This phase of the work demands sustained concentration. Weariness is present now, yet it is managed through routine. The collector follows identical sequence every day, permitting habit to support attention when vitality diminishes. Writing instruments are dipped carefully. Fluid is allowed to flow evenly. Sheets are turned slowly to prevent smearing. Each action reinforces the sense of arrangement that defines the function. The empire does not depend upon rapidity in these moments. It depends upon accuracy. Occasionally, another functionary enters the chamber briefly to verify a detail or deliver a declaration. These exchanges are quiet and exact. Information is shared without elaboration. Clarification is sought only when required. The collector responds accurately, referencing the volume rather than recollection. This dependence upon documentation over memory protects the integrity of the work. Personal impression holds no position here. Once tallying is complete, the collector prepares the materials for storage. Currency is placed into secured containers according to protocol. Seals are examined and applied. Documents are bundled carefully. Each item is returned to its designated position. The volume is closed and marked to indicate completion of the day's entries. This act signals the transition from active work to examination. The collector takes a moment to verify that nothing remains loose or unaccounted for. Before departing the office, the collector reviews the summary of the day. This summary is not elaborate. It records totals, notes irregularities, and flags matters requiring future attention. The language employed is restrained and factual. No interpretation is present. The summary exists to ensure continuity across days and between functionaries. It permits the system to operate beyond individual presence. As the office grows quieter still, The collector gathers belongings and prepares to depart. The physical burden carried earlier has been transferred into secure storage. What remains is the mental burden of completion. The day's obligations have been satisfied, the system has been maintained. No satisfaction is expressed, only closure. The work is done because it must be done, not because it invites acknowledgement. Stepping back into the street, the collector encounters a town transformed by evening. Activity is diminished to a gentle rhythm. Illumination appears in openings, voices soften. The streets belong now to return rather than departure. The collector moves through this space with the same composed presence maintained throughout the day. No longer representing active governance, but still embodying the continuity of arrangement. This part of the day settles the work into position. It ensures that nothing remains unresolved without recognition. It prepares the foundation for tomorrow, when the process will commence again. In another quiet morning, the collector walks homeward without urgency, the rhythm of the day still present but no longer demanding attention as evening closes around the town in steady silence. The evening phase of the day develops slowly, not as an extension of labor but as a period of examination, containment, and quiet responsibility. After departing the administrative structure, the collector does not immediately withdraw from duty in a personal sense. Although the formal tasks of collection and tallying are complete, the function continues through awareness and control. The town at this hour is calmer, yet not inactive. Movement persists in softened form. People return to their dwellings. Small assemblies gather briefly before dispersing. Lamps are ignited one by one, altering the character of streets that were occupied earlier. The collector moves through this environment with intentional calm, conscious that visibility still carries significance, even when authority is no longer exercised directly. The route followed in the evening is recognized and unvaried. It avoids populated zones and follows streets that transition gradually from public to private space. This uniformity is purposeful. It signals closure rather than observation. The collector does not pause near places of enterprise or households encountered earlier. The work of the day has been concluded appropriately. Remaining present in those zones would suggest incomplete business. Instead, the collector permits distance to re-establish ordinary boundaries between official obligation and private existence. As the walk persists, the collector's attention turns inward, examining the day without pressure. The sequence of encounters, the manner of exchanges, and the status of records pass through the mind not as emotional impressions but as procedural verification. Were all necessary entries completed? Were unresolved situations clearly marked? Were directives followed exactly? This examination is quiet and methodical, not driven by uncertainty but by custom. The function demands certainty, and certainty is sustained through repetition of this mental verification each evening. Occasionally, a sound or sight prompts brief recollection of a specific engagement, a merchant's explanation, a household's postponement, an incomplete payment received according to regulation. These recollections do not invite reconsideration. Determinations made within procedure stand as they are. The collector does not revisit them emotionally. The system permits future modification through formal channels. Personal reflection remains confined to verifying that the process was implemented evenly and without deviation. The town itself seems to recognize the conclusion of official hours. People who identify the collector offer brief nods or neutral greetings, neither deferential nor familiar. These gestures reflect an understanding of function rather than connection. The collector responds in kind, sustaining distance without coldness. This equilibrium preserves authority while permitting the town to return to its private rhythms. As night deepens, the physical weariness of the day becomes more apparent, though it is received without objection. The body has followed a recognized pattern of movement and restraint. Weariness is an anticipated result, not a burden. It signals that the day's demands have been satisfied. The collector adjusts pace marginally, not to hasten, but to accommodate the quieter streets and diminished illumination. Reaching the lodging, the collector enters without formality. The interior is quiet and unaltered from morning. The case, now lighter, is set aside in its customary position. Garments are removed carefully and arranged for the next day. Nothing is left to chance. Preparation for tomorrow commences implicitly through the manner objects are positioned and space is preserved. Even rest follows arrangement. Before settling completely, the collector performs one final act of examination. A small notebook or personal record may be consulted briefly, not to add new information, but to verify that all official matters have been transferred correctly into the system. This custom reinforces separation between public documentation and private recollection. The collector does not carry the Empire's accounts into sleep. They remain where they belong, secured and documented. The evening meal, if consumed, is simple and quiet. No reflection on achievement or challenge occurs. The day is regarded as complete, not evaluated. The collector's identity is not tied to individual results, but to uniformity across time. One day resembles another by design. This resemblance sustains the system. As rest approaches, the town outside settles into near silence. Sounds diminish, illumination fades. The collector prepares for sleep, with the same control shown throughout the day. No anticipation of tomorrow's tasks exists beyond awareness that they will arrive. The work will commence again at dawn, following identical pattern, directed by identical principles. The evening closes without formality. The collector's function recedes temporarily, not concluded but paused. The continuity of imperial routine does not demand constant action. It demands reliable return. Sleep arrives not as escape, but as part of the cycle that permits the work to persist across days, seasons, and years, unbroken and unremarked. The final phase of the day develops slowly, almost imperceptibly, as night settles completely over the town, and the remaining traces of activity dissolve into stillness. This is not a conclusion marked by closure or reflection in any formal sense, but a gradual easing of responsibility from active attention into quiet continuation. The collector lies at rest, yet the structures that govern the day remain present, not as conscious thought, but as embedded custom. Sleep does not interrupt the system. It supports it. The Empire does not depend upon constant vigilance, but upon reliable cycles of effort and renewal, executed by individuals whose lives are shaped by routine rather than exception. In the stillness of night, the town exists differently. Streets that earlier bore wagons and voices now hold only faint echoes. Structures that served commerce and administration during daylight hours stand closed and silent, their functions paused but not diminished. The collector's awareness of this environment persists even in rest. The familiarity of sounds or their absence confirms that arrangement remains intact. Nothing urgent presses forward. No unresolved matter intrudes. This quiet is not accidental. It is the result of work completed correctly, of records balanced, of obligations acknowledged and postponed where necessary through appropriate means. The rhythm of the collector's life mirrors the rhythm of the system itself. Days follow one another without sharp distinction. Each morning repeats the structure of the previous one, adjusted only by circumstance and documentation. This repetition is not monotony, but reliability. Through it, the Empire sustains itself across distance and time. The collector does not conceive of the Empire as a vast or abstract entity during these hours. It is experienced instead through small, consistent actions repeated across countless towns by countless others performing identical function. Sleep is part of that consistency, ensuring that the individual returns capable and composed. Even in rest, certain customs persist unconsciously. The positioning of belongings, the alignment of space, the absence of disorder These particulars reflect an internalized discipline that does not require active enforcement. They permit the mind to settle without concern. The collector does not rehearse the day's events in search of meaning. Meaning is not sought here. The value of the work lies in its continuity, not its interpretation. Night deepens, and with it arrives a sense of suspension rather than conclusion. The town waits not in anticipation, but in readiness. Tomorrow's activity is already implicit in the arrangement of streets, structures, and records. The collector's rest contributes to this readiness. By withdrawing from action, the individual preserves the capacity to act again. This equilibrium between engagement and withdrawal defines the function as much as collection or tallying. The final hours before dawn pass without incident. The town remains still. Lamps burn low. Occasional sounds mark the presence of life continuing quietly within walls. The collector remains unaware of these particulars, yet dependent upon the stability they represent. The system does not require awareness at every moment. It requires confidence in routine, reinforced through repetition. As the night approaches its conclusion, the boundary between rest and preparation begins to dissolve. Sleep lightens. Awareness returns gradually, not prompted by alarm, but by custom. The body prepares to rise at the recognized hour. The cycle nears its renewal. No sense of transition from one day to the next exists, only continuation. Yesterday's work has settled into documentation. Tomorrow's work will emerge from it. The day of the collector does not conclude with reflection or acknowledgement. It concludes by folding itself into the larger pattern of imperial routine. Each completed day reinforces that pattern, ensuring that the next can proceed without disruption. The empire persists not through dramatic acts, but through this quiet accumulation of ordinary days, each one executed with care, control, and consistency. Night holds the town briefly, then releases it again. The final moments before dawn return the world to the same stillness in which the day commenced. The collector's function, paused but intact, waits within this stillness, ready to resume without declaration. The cycle continues, unbroken, steady, and largely unseen, sustained by the simple fact that the work will be done again, as it has been done before, without variation and without conclusion.